like the main kind of assumptions that we'll work with as we go through this workshop are that you're a complex system and that those don't have to behave incrementally and linearly. You can make really radical jumps and pivots, and the quantum leap is often thrown around as kind of a little coaching, catchy shorthand. But in some ways, it's really true. Complex systems don't behave linearly. So what we can work with is the assumption that things get really good really quickly for you, or things get really bad really quickly. And ideally, what we're going to do is get them really good really quickly and headed in that direction more and more. So systems are a biggie. You're an animal. That's a biggie. Like, if nothing else, you are an animal, right? But you're something more than an animal too. That's where some of the somatics practice comes into play. And one of the things that hopefully you guys have done some kind of reflecting about prior to this workshop is sort of the primacy of having a vision, having an aim as an animal. Like within the animal kingdom, we're pretty unique, right? We have some of the most profound, adept vision of any animal in the animal kingdom. I mean, we've got, eyes facing forward, kind of the typical predator setup. Although, we're a little omnivorous too. But beyond that, I mean, our whole structure is basically organized around us being able to interact with whatever we see in front of us in ways that no other animal can do at the level that we can do it. Particularly the ability to throw and hit whatever we're aiming at, right? So we are kind of built on this platform of a hunter social animal. Like we function very well in groups. That's why, again, I asked, like, I can see everybody's faces. And we function very well if we have something to aim at. If we don't have a clear aim in sight, we spin our wheels really quickly. Like, I can't tell you the number of people I talk to who are just like confused and tense and don't know where to go next and this, that, and the other. And I ask, well, like, what are you working towards? What are you trying to build or create or all of this? And they say, oh, I don't know. It's like, well, that's a good reason why you're stuck. Like that explains about 90% of why you're not making much progress, is because having an aim in sight, having a clear goal or a vision or whatever you want to call it, right? We'll use those kind of interchangeably. Having that filters your actions. It's like you can ignore most of the world and most of the things you could do once you have a clear aim in sight. But until you have that, it's like, well, do I do this or do I do that? Do I do this or do I do that? How about that? And no wonder people feel so scattered, right? And so I'm curious, for folks who have done a little bit of the preemptive homework, type in the little chat box there, or just like let me know, what are some of the things that you are aiming at currently? Just so I can get a little sense of like what it is we're working with here. What are you trying to bring to life? What kind of change are you trying to make for yourself? What's the target that you're trying to hit here? And then we can use that kind of play a little bit here. So if you just type that in and let me know, that would be awesome. Sustainable business, that's a good one. Yeah. A livelihood is a really good thing to make. And some of you guys may have seen, I accidentally typed the name of this Zoom workshop as more income, less impact. And I think that was just like a slip, not the main focus, income, but it's certainly something that you can make a lot of progress really quickly as we go through some of this. Shifting to passive income. Okay, cool. Create a side business for myself that includes movement training in the PT and yoga world. Cool. Stronger in my body. Shift careers from circus to law. Well, that's different. Okay. Play more music, help more folks with Pilates, better self-promotion. I feel more resourced, professional satisfaction. Okay, cool. Continuity in the things I know work. That's a good one. Yeah. Movement practice that works for regular people. That's cool. Nancy launching Reiki practice. Cool. Confidence, professional success, all of this sort of stuff. We're sensing some common themes here, right? Like as different a context as we might be in, there are a few fundamental things that make us tick. A lot of us typed in like feeling better in our bodies is a biggie. And it's like, yeah, if you don't feel sufficient and capable in your body, what are you going to worry about other than that? Like getting at home in your body, square one. It's got to be. Business, professional transitions, finding confidence through all of that. That's a biggie too. Hit earnings target, publish book, finish a book, a lot of authors. That's fun. Leverage talents, create a structure to paint and draw again, launch business. Sweet. Yeah. So we've got the body stuff, right? Which is maybe foundational to a lot of the other changes we want to make, which might be professional based. It might be bringing a new business to life, or maybe it's focused on a relationship, or whatever the case may be. We're going to see that all of these things are a little more connected than they might first appear. So very cool. I'm glad to see that so many of you guys have actually done some of the homework here. That's exciting. Now, there's an assumption that I make that is a little, different, a little strange for some folks. But it's based on the work of this really incredible physicist and mechanical engineer named Adrian Bejan. And he developed what is kind of a new fundamental law of physics called the constructal law. And when I first came across that, I was really blown away. And it makes a lot of sense of a lot of what we see in the world around us. And it helps us understand how we can make more progress in our own lives too. So the constructal law, in a shorthand, is basically like a flow system, whether it's flowing water or carbon or information or heat, whatever the case may be. In order for it to persist, in order for it to survive, it has to evolve more and more efficient means of flowing. And they do that naturally. That's why when you look around the natural world, we see these patterns come into play. Some of you guys may have seen a little picture I put on Facebook of the ice freezing in these beautiful patterns that look like a nervous system. Or we see these branching patterns in trees, and people often say it's fractal. It's well, yeah, in some ways it is. But it's also a little more predictable than that too. So what Professor Bejan found is you can actually predict the structure of these flows, right? That based on, what's flowing and how it flows, you can track how it's going to branch out, which I think is just totally beautiful. It explains a lot of what we see in the world, whether it's information systems, transit systems, like the structure of our highways, all of this. They naturally emerge more and more efficient means of flow, more and more of getting the stuff done that they want to get done. It happens naturally with a pretty key condition. And that condition is in the absence of constraints. So that's where we run into a lot of trouble. That's, I think, what keeps us from functioning and flowing at kind of the utmost that we could, is that we have this beautiful capacity to flow, whether it's in our movement, whether it's in our lives, whether it's in our relationships, and yet we're constrained in significant ways. And you might think, if you dam a river, right, it's useful in some ways. You can generate a lot of power from that, but you can generate a lot of power because all of that energy that's flowing downstream is being diverted. So everything downstream of that withers and dies. Not a pretty situation for anything down here. You might think in arterial plaque buildup in our blood flow leads to some pretty significant problems too, right? Stroke, heart attack, not fun. A constraint in our ability to move ourselves, right? Like a hip impingement, frozen shoulder, whatever the case may be. It impedes the natural flow of the system. And as we go through the rest of this, I might use the word system or organism kind of interchangeably. I might say you as well. So you as an organism, as a system, you're built for flow. And if we could just find what those key constraints are and remove them, you would be capable of so much more. I mean, there's another kind of mathematical distribution that I'm sure some of you guys are familiar with. It's called the Pareto distribution. It's often kind of simplified as the 80-20 rule. Basically, it's 20% of the things you do are responsible for 80% of the the success that you get or the satisfaction that you get, right? You could simplify it even further and say like the square root of any given number of people or things or activities is responsible for 50% of the outcome. Like 10% of the people in an organization are responsible for 50% of the work that gets done. 10% of the people who tune in and watch this are going to see 50% of the success and results of it. So it's like, choose which 10% you want to be in at the start, right? But also, 10% of the things we're doing are causing 50% of the headaches we run into. So I wonder, you've probably got an intuitive sense of those. And I know I asked some folks to kind of reflect on this ahead of time. Off the top of your head, what are some of the constraints that you're up against at this point? Like, if you're honest with yourself, what are those obstacles that are getting in the way of your efficient flow, of your ability to find ease within your body, within your work, within your life? Like, what's getting in your way at this point? And you can type those in too. Like, again, we'll make this kind of back and forth. Damaging self-narratives. Yeah, that's a biggie. Mind. Yep. Dealing with past financial patterns matters. Yeah. Self-confidence. Okay. Poor self-image. Okay. So maybe we get in our own way. Limiting beliefs, lack of clarity, inability to make aims. Okay. Yeah. So again, bit of a common pattern here, right? We've got this beautiful capacity as an animal that no other animal on earth has. This reflexive self-consciousness, this ability to project and imagine whole new worlds, current expectations, not moving, not getting outside, keeping small. Yeah. So we've got this reflexive self-consciousness. We're able to think about ourselves. That's where we get part of this self-image from, right? And on the one hand, that's partly responsible for all of the good that we've seen, all of the stuff that we enjoy. We can thank that. And, double-edged sword, all of the shit that gets in our way, we can thank that too. So what do we make of that? It's like, in some ways, we are responsible for some of the situation that we find ourselves in. Now, I want to make a pretty clear distinction here. There is a significant difference between responsibility and blame. Let's like lay that out right off the bat, because I know a lot of times when people say like taking responsibility for oneself, it's very often conflated with, well, you're blaming someone for the way things are and the situation they're in. It's like, no, not at all. Blame implies a judgment of some sort, right? But what we're saying is that you don't live in a vacuum, and you can shape the world around you if you could get out of your own way. And so that's a big part of what I want to kind of share with you guys as we go through this, is that if you could bring all of yourself to identifying and dissolving those constraints that you're up against, and I mean that in terms of your physical capacity, your emotional and psychological capacity, which aren't separate things, right? You would be capable of a lot more. It's like when we look around at how much of ourselves we muster up day to day, the best of us are maybe at like 5% of what the total capacity of the organism is. And of course, we're never going to get to 100%. Anyone that's like, actualize all of your potential now, it's garbage, right? Like that's an ideal we can aim for. That's like the vision of visions, the meta vision we can shoot for, is like, shit, what would it look like if I could bring all of myself to this? But, the big assumption we'll work with throughout all of this, there are a lot of big assumptions we're making, right? But hopefully they click into place, is that you're bigger and greater than maybe you realize at this point. Sounds like a bit of a cliche, right? We'll see if we can demonstrate some validity to that. So you're the result of billions of years worth of vital process and evolution, if you buy into that frame of being, or if you buy into the kind of divinity frame too. It's like, well, You're the seed of, sure, take your pick, right? Either way, it's like you've got a lot coming from behind you, right? We can think of that as a surge kind of pushing us forward. You are the result of all of the achievements of your culture, whatever that culture is, all of the achievements of your family and your historical lineage, all of your teachers, all of their teachers. You've got all of this coming up from behind you. You're standing not just on your feet, but on the ground, on the earth, like that goes miles and miles and thousands of miles deep. It's like you're a part of something bigger. At the very least, you're a part of something bigger. And as we start to refine and shift the self-image that so many of you guys know is the thing that's keeping you in place, you'll find that more than just being a part of that, you can expand your sense of self. And one of the kind of wisdom traditions that I pluck from is the deep ecology movement. And Arne Naess, one of the greatest writers of that, he had this beautiful phrase, the broadening and the deepening of the self. And that's really what we're about. Because when you can expand your conception of yourself and deepen your roots within yourself and within the world, that's when you really start to make some leverage. So that's exciting. So let's talk about this ecology of change framework, the way that we can start to bring some of this to life. This too is built on some of the threads that I saw in the old kind of body, mind, somatic educators. And I, as I was digging into figuring my own self and stuff out, I realized like, oh, some of these guys, like they're talking about the same thing in different lenses. And well, shoot, if they could just connect their own dots, I mean, they're dead, they can't. But if we could connect their dots a little bit better, we could give ourselves a much better go with things. And so we'll pluck from three smart guys here too. The first of whom is F.M. Alexander, founder of the eponymous Alexander technique. And I know some of you guys might be familiar with this too. It'll be a good refresher. But anyway, let's say we've got this vision in sight. It's like we've got this glorious future that we want to bring to life. And of course, some folks will say like, well, just sit back and manifest it. It's like, well, you could try. And certainly like believing that that's a possibility is a good thing. Like if you don't believe it's a possibility, it's certainly not going to happen. At least not with any of your volitional control. But just having that aim in sight, it's like, it's good. You need that. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient, right? In the realm of kind of biological causality, would say like necessary and sufficient. It's not sufficient. So Alexander had this beautiful little phrase, people don't decide their futures, they decide their habits, and their habits decide their futures. And we can think, well, yeah, that makes sense. If I've got that aim in sight, A, it helps me filter a lot of the noise that I see in the world around me. But B, you've got to not just see it, but build toward it. You've got to find some way to take those constructive steps that help bring that to life. And when I talk with people, like 70, 90% of people say like the big thing that they're struggling with is like habit formation and self-sabotage. And we got to think, well, okay, if that's so common, why is it such a big deal? Like, it's probably, we got to double check the date, right? The 20th. It's probably about this time of year that like 90% of people crap out on their new habits from the whole New Year's resolution thing. What the hell's up with that? Like, why year after year do we buy into the same stuff when it clearly doesn't work? 90% of New Year's resolutions fail, and we have to scratch our heads and wonder like, okay, we're missing something on the whole habit train. So what's a habit anyway? Like, can you guys type in, what's the current kind of conception of what a habit is? When I say habit, what comes to mind? What are we working with when we're working with habits here? Repeated actions. Yeah, something you do without choosing to consistently, something you do without thinking. Okay, something you're already used to. Yeah, okay. Actions you do automatically, regular ritual or action. Activity repeated. Okay, yeah, without thought, good and bad, unconscious behaviors. Yeah, okay. So it's stuff you do that we can think of as kind of the path of least resistance. It's the stuff we do so well that we don't have to think about it. I have a habit of drinking coffee every morning. And I don't think like, well, sometimes I think, I can't wait to have this coffee. It's going to taste so good. But other times just like, oh, coffee. That's what a person like me does. That's what a person like the person I want to be does. Coffee's great. I love it. You can tell I've had a little bit of it today already, maybe. So a habit, it's the sort of thing that we do without thinking about it. And from a neurological sense, it's the action that has the deepest neurological grooves, the most well-myelinated synaptic connections. Motivation and prompt leading to action on repeat. That's a pretty good way to think of it. Yeah, nice one, Scott. So it's the sort of thing that you've done it enough. It is so well grooved within your nervous system that that's just it's the least energetically costly way of moving forward. So it's a behavior that takes place over time with enough repetitions that your system says, that's the way I want to go. That's the way that I know how to go. And I often think of it like a ski slope, right? And you can tell the most popular path down the mountain because it's the one with the deepest grooves, right? Like people ski the same runs again and again and again. And it gets really packed down. And if you come at the end of the day, it's kind of a bummer because it's like, well, it's already tamped down. I don't know, not my favorite way to ski. But of course, it's not the only way down the mountain. You don't have to stick within they like you to stick within the narrow lines. They don't like when you go outside of those. And oftentimes you don't want to. But in terms of our behavior, what we're looking for is flexibility, right? It's like they don't have a perfect floor desk set up for me here. And yet, luckily, I can still function sitting at a desk and a chair like a normal person, right? What a way to be. So if we're looking at a behavior over time that starts to get grooved into our nervous system, it's like the more runs down the mountain we can get on these other paths, the more options we have. And it's not to demolish your old behaviors, right? Like clearly the way that you're doing things has some benefit. Like it's gotten you here for better or for worse. And there are things you could do differently that could give you a little better go of things. But certainly not the only way that we want. And we might look at health of the organism as like the ability to effectively engage in the most different ways within the world. Like we want to be competent across a broad set of domains. And so we don't decide our futures. We decide our habits. In some ways, we don't exactly even decide our habits. Like that's true-ish, but incomplete, because again, we can see that like, well, has anybody tried to change a habit? Like, I know I have in the past, and has it worked successfully? It's like, maybe, maybe not. Depends on the thing, right? Well, so what does that depend on? Wouldn't that be cool if we could figure that out for ourselves? If we could just like click in different habits without having to like whip ourselves with willpower day after day after day, because that's the way that a lot of folks do it, right? I have to write it down to change the habit. Okay, interesting, yeah. So a lot of folks will just kind of flagellate themselves with willpower and motivation and self-discipline, and we get a lot of, frankly, nagging from some ways of doing it. It's like, if you can't make this in place, you are weak-willed and you need more discipline. The way I look at it is, if you need, more willpower and more discipline, it's like maybe there's, again, a constraint that's just impeding you from doing that all on your own, right? Like we need willpower and effort and self-discipline and motivational tricks for the things that we don't really want to do with all of ourselves. Like some part of ourselves is saying like, not that. Nope, I'm going to eat ice cream instead of going to the gym, or whatever the case may be. I know I've done that. Shoot, ice cream's delicious, and going to the gym, you don't always want to do that. I don't know if I ever want to go to the gym. Let's be real. But anyway, so if we could just like click behaviors into place over time, that would make things a little easier for us. And so we might ask, well, okay, how do we shift behavior? Two other smart guys have thought about that quite a bit. One of whom It's Kurt Lewin, a behavioral psychologist in the 20th century, who he developed something called field theory that was later taken by the Gestalt therapists as looking at kind of the way that we perceive, the way that we determine relevance. But one of the big things he noticed was that there aren't just good people on one side and bad people on the other side, or there aren't just criminals and there aren't just good citizens, or whatever the case may be. He found that rather than such rigidity in a person, there's certainly people with rigidity. We'll talk about that a little later on too. But rather than like rigid, fixed types of people, he found that people behave differently in different situations. And this was back when like mathematics and like the behaviorists kind of tried to make everything as objective as possible. So he wrote out this little mathematical equation that we can kind of colloquially say behavior is the result of a person within a given environment. It's a relationship with the environment that we find ourselves in that determines our behavior. And environment in this case means the spaces and places that you find yourself in day after day, the people that you surround yourself with as well. So it's not just, environment is like nature, right? It's the whole ecology that you find yourself within. Like change on a behavioral level really is an ecological process. And so you might think, if you take a little audit of your day at this point, it's like, what are the shapes you make most consistently? Go figure. That's the shape that your body, by and large, is going to make most familiarly. Who are the people that you associate with? Are they supportive? Are they draining? Are they toxic? Are they like rah-rah in your corner? Are they neutral? What are the environments that you find yourself in? Like, do they inspire you? Do they drag you down? Do they just kind of like stultify you and make you like the lowest common denominator version of yourself? These things matter in a profound way. Like I, in some sense, have my Chandler Stevens teacher voice on because I'm in kind of teacher mode with you guys. That's going to change, right? Like if I'm talking to my mom on the phone, love her. I talk with her differently though, right? Or if I'm hanging out with my buddies and we're kind of like goofing off on the weekend and like maybe we've had a couple of beers, different environment, right? Different behaviors. Now we can make use of that. And you can probably think of a few ways to make use of that for yourself. And you might jot down any ideas that you've got too for, notebook, whatever the case may be. But it's like, if there's a certain behavior that is going to help move me toward that vision, what are the environments I could put myself in that would make it easier to automatically slip into that behavior? Like, what are the environments that would facilitate that behavior coming to life without me having to think about it and willpower myself into it day after day after day? Like, what are the conditions that would make that occur easily? And you'll find that for a lot of us, that's in addition of some things and a subtraction of other things. Like for me, I know the more time I give myself outside every single day, like that makes me a really good version of me. The less time I spend like typing away at emails, just like hunched over the screen, like that makes me a better me. I am able to be way more effective if I can take some of that email time and turn it into outside time. Similarly, I'm sure we've all been in relationships that haven't quite done us a whole lot of good. Whether that's social, romantic, professional, whatever the case may be, it's like, oh, I feel like shit when I hang out with those people. Why am I spending 2 years with this person? That's crazy. Maybe I ought to change things a little bit. Not to say that it's easy, right? Like there's inevitably a bit of just a pull away from familiarity. That's why so many people stay in shitty relationships for so long. They're so grooved into what feels familiar and comfortable that it's difficult. Oh, good. I see a hug. Hopefully that's a good thing there. So, lost my train of thought. We get so caught up in the familiar stuff, right? Even if it's bad for us, that if we go outside the ring of the circle of fire, if we go into those, like the darkness beyond the fire, it's like, ooh, what's out there? What's out there is everything that you want. Like, that fire is going to grow cold at a certain point if we don't venture out into the darkness a bit, into the unfamiliarity. So, how do we muster up more of ourselves to make that change? Well, actually, even before that, would you guys type in a few things that like help you environment-wise become a better version of you? Like, what are the things that click with you most easily off the top of your head? Jenny even typed in, change my environment to be more supportive. Yeah. Outside, no clutter, cleaning my room, being on the trails, we'll assume. Maybe trials. Being outside, moving and playing. Oops, trails. Sauna, cleaning my space, time alone, the people around me. Cool. Yep. Wow, I can't even read this quickly. Communicating wants and needs, getting feedback, outside time, sketching nature, family support. Again, we're not so different, you and I, and you and everyone watching this. It's like we've got some common things that help us thrive. Like, we've got this biophilia. We love the natural world. And every time I guide people through this process, it's like nature is one of the big things. It's like, man, if I could just get outside more often, I'd feel way better. Or if I had these social and familial supports, like that's really what I need. And it's like, well, yeah, nature, tribe, body, like those are the three places that we feel at home. And if we don't feel at home in our bodies, in our social network, in our world, we get this just like this schism within ourselves. We run into a lot of trouble. Sleep, alone time, more sleep. I'm with you there. Bit of an introvert, and I love sleep. I'm like the old man who goes to bed at 10 o'clock on a good night. That's my favorite. Belonging. Yeah. So time outside, movement, at home in our bodies, social support, all of, like, cool. Take notes and know that, because it can be really difficult for us to know this intuitively, right? You aren't alone with these things that make you you. Like, a lot of us tuning in, we self-select ourselves as like kind of the weird ones, right? When you look around out there at like the way regular people do it, it can be a little overwhelming. We think like, oh, what the hell am I doing? Like, oh, God, am I crazy? You're not crazy. Like, maybe you're just a good human animal with awareness of like what a human animal needs. So, a little pat on the back for that too. We're going to go into a whole lot of just like, treating yourself like someone you want the best for. It goes a long way. So you're not crazy for knowing those things and wanting those things. I just want to make that clear too. But it can be difficult to change our environment, particularly when we get into familiar environments. It's comfortable. It's what we know. It's a part of who we are. It's part of our identities. It's a part of our image of ourselves, which, as we saw before, is maybe the number one constraint that's responsible for like 80 to 90% of all of our headaches, our restrictions, our inhibitions. So that's where this third smart guy comes into play. His name is Moshe Feldenkrais, founder of what has since been called the Feldenkrais method, right? He didn't call it that. I think people that call their method after their own name, it's like, okay, let me see. But anyway, Moshe talked about this idea that we act in accordance with our self-image. And self-image it's an interesting thing. It is maybe more popular in the kind of psychological and the therapeutic realms than in kind of the movement world. But I think it's like they got to have the conversation at some point. And he was one of the first guys to really bridge the gap there. And you can think of your self-image, and this is probably familiar to a lot of you folks, but self-image is partly the cortical map within your brain of your body, right? Like, based on all of the perception of your lived experience as a sensory organism, you have an image of yourself. And it's a little weird if you see like a representation of the homunculus with like huge lips and hands and feet and all of this. I mean, it's goofy to look at. You guys have probably seen it in like the old biology textbooks, those sort of things. So that's part of your self-image, is how your brain maps yourself. Like truly, that self that we cling to so much, it just emerges from all of our interactions with the world around us. Like in some ways, the self is kind of empty. It's the way a lot of cognitive theorists more recently start to conceptualize it. Is like there's not one fixed self. There's not one you. There's a you who emerges from all of your life history and all of the interaction with the world around you. Like again, this version of myself emerges from this environment that I find myself in, talking with you guys today. So that's part of it. We take in sensory information. We get this rich sensory apparatus, like all of our 5 familiar senses, right? For exteroception, and then our internal sensoria as well. And we, through this miraculous operation, process all of that into an image of ourselves within space and time, within the pull of gravity, within the flow of time. It's like, here I am. And I know this. I know here I am because I can sense here I am. You can do some interesting work, some damaging work, when you remove some of that sensory experience. Like I had a strange experience a couple of months back where I did like a long float in a float tank, sensory deprivation tank. It was like 3 hours. And I could feel like it was strange, but I could kind of feel myself blurring a bit. And I got out at the end, and blurring is the only way I can think of it. I got out at the end and slate, like, oh, okay, there's no tension. And at the same time, it's like, who the hell am I at this point? Like, it was disarming and disorienting because we need sensory feedback in order to place ourselves, in order to embody ourselves. All of that to say, the physical sensory motor stuff is a part of self-image. And as some of us talked about at the start, the emotional narrative component of ourselves is another key part of self-image. It's like the story you tell yourself about yourself. The other shorthand we might think of is like, a person like me behaves in this sort of way. Okay, yeah, that's interesting. The image of myself as a coach is different than the image of myself as a research scientist. Like I behave differently. I engage in the world differently. The image of me as a guy with a curled mustache, like, changes the way I interact with the world and changes the way the world interacts with me too. It's a lot more fun. Like people joke a lot more, which is kind of enjoyable, right? But so what we need to do, if we want to remove this primary constraint that so many of us are up against, if we want to find the resources within ourselves to shift our environment more effectively, is change our self-image. And first and foremost, believe that we are able to change. BC said it beautifully, my story is not my identity. Yeah, like it's not the entirety of you. Because if nothing else, you are in process. You are able to change. And where so many of us run into trouble is that we get very fixed on like, this is who I am and how I am, and I have like this way of operating within the world. And it's like, the more rigid you are, like the more you are in this role that you play, the more stale life gets, the less options you have. And so if we want to go about shifting this, we need to shift the self-image. It's like we need to introduce opportunities for you as a learning organism to learn that you are more than what you thought you have been. That's a messy sentence. Let's see if we can change that a little bit. We need to give you experiences kind of outside of the lump sum of all the stuff that you've experienced so far. The image I often use with folks is a scatter plot. It's like, a bunch of little data points over here. And your self-image, is kind of the average of all of those. But the more points we give you over here, where you say, for example, oh, I can stand on my own 2 feet. Oh, okay. Or, oh, okay. Ooh, well, that's interesting. The more of those different nuanced experiences we can give ourselves, the more we're able to shift our self-image. Again, not to discount all of these past experiences, but just to show that they're not the entirety of you. They're a story, they're a cortical map, all of which can shift, right? Oof, that sounds like a little bit of, we're going to change our story. It's a little heady, right? But so I wonder, if you were going to shift this self-image of yours, what would you do? What comes to mind? Like, how do you go about doing that? What's your experience of this so far? And yeah, just go ahead and type in anything that comes to mind. I'd love to have more compassion and appreciation. That's a good one. For what? For you? For life? For what? Self and others. Yeah, that's a good start. What else? If you were to shift this image that you have of yourself, this neurological and narrative component, be more extroverted, okay? Have more confidence and belief in what I'm doing, okay? Do things I feel hesitant to do, step into the unknown, questioning my rigidly held beliefs. We've got some good stuff. We've got an interesting mix of things here. That's where words get a little tricky. On the one hand, it's like, what would you do if you shifted your self-image? That's kind of where we're going, right? But I'm talking about kind of like the means whereby you would change your self-image. And so some folks are saying like, yeah, have more compassion, be more honest about what I want, question things, let go of attachment to specific outcomes and focus on my input. Yeah. Explore movement, inquiry, be more of a true self connected to others. Yeah, cool. Now, of course, if I were just to click my fingers and say, let go of your attachment to specific outcomes, focus on your input. Does that work? Or if we just say like, well, be more of a true self, just be your true self. It's like, okay, I would love to, and yet if it were that simple, maybe we'd have done it already. Let's see, I started saying I'm a movement coach and no one was surprised, yet I'd waited for a long time to say that. That's interesting. Yeah, Julie, I could totally see that as like as a part of your identity, right? So especially with all of the nouns and adjectives we attach to ourselves, like that's a part of us. Try some new things, new experiences. Yeah, explore movement. Cool. So there are certain things we can do that can shift that, using my words to voice who I am. Yeah, nice, cool. I like to learn how to communicate more effectively. That's good too. Detach from external identifiers. Check, just detach. Yeah. So some of these things are, I mean, we can tell the culture that we live in because we do live in a very intellectual culture. We like to live up here. And we can say, I'm going to shift this narrative and I'm going to try these new things and detach from these. And I'm just going to, yeah, in some ways, yes. In other ways, we can keep in mind that, again, we are an animal first and foremost. We have this organismic layer beneath and kind of foundational to this layer of reflexive self-consciousness, as we talked about earlier. So the way to shift yourself in the most fundamental way is in an embodied way, right? Like whatever we are, we emerge from this sensory motor experience of ourselves. And if we're going to create a significant change, well, we have to work with that sensory motor experience. It's like all of the physiological, neurological connections we talked about, those came from sensory motor experience. Like you don't have to think about walking at this point because you had uncountable iterations of trying to get up and walk around in your infancy and as a toddler and all of that. It's like you were getting this pre-verbal experience of yourself within the world. The only feedback, the only way you knew how to do it was through a sensory motor dialogue with the world around you. And similarly, all of the narrative components, the emotional components, those have a physiological base as well. You can just think of, like, if you think of something that makes you angry, like if you think of like a time when you were really like fucking pissed, it's like you can't think of that without a physiological shift taking place. Similarly, if you think of a time when you were really at ease with yourself and really grounded within yourself, well, that creates a physiological shift too. And so if we want to shift our narrative emotional component and we want to shift this physiological component, well, it's like, I hope we're working with the body, because if we're just talking, it's like that's why people can stay in old school psychoanalyst's office for like decades, right? Like Freud had a good thing going for him. Genius, I should say. And yet, like, years and years and years and years and years and years and years of talking on the couch. Yeah, maybe he was missing something. So I want to share Woody Allen. I don't know if I catch that, Martha. You got to fill me in. But anyway, I want to give you a couple of what happens when your self-image is informed by chronic pain. Yeah, that's a good thing to keep in mind too. There are all sorts of ways that our self-image can get skewed, right? Any painful experience, whether it's emotional, whether it's physical, just like smudges the self-image. It completely removes some of the self-image. It separates us from ourselves. And so what we want to do is gradually start to re-identify with those parts of ourselves, start to weave them back into our understanding of ourselves. And fundamentally, the way we did that in our development was through movement, right? And then, of course, we picked up parts of our identity through dialogue too, through enculturation, all of that. It's like we can't forget about that part. Talking is good, can't be the only thing. Movement is good, probably can't be the only thing either. So let's maybe play with a little bit of an experience to see if we can just get out of the verbalization and get into our bodies a little bit more. And we'll work with aiming as a way we do this. And actually, even before that, just to highlight some of the physicality of the self-image, we'll try a little experiment, and I'll guide you guys through this. And I'll show you, just for physical reference, like the shape you'll make, but you can close your eyes and do it too. That's fine. But so you'll sit here or stand here, just like pointing your index fingers out into space in front of you. And you could close your eyes. And it's always interesting when we take away our visual input, because we're such visually dominated creatures that we often forget about all of the other sensoria we have available to us. Now, without peeking, what I invite you to do is imagine that you have a line connecting the tip of your right index finger to your left eye. There's a line extending from your left eye to the tip of your right index finger. And similarly, there's a line extending from your right eye to your left index finger. And you might try to picture those in your mind's eye. See if you can get a representation of what that might look like, what that might feel like, how that would be. And we're going to just play a little experiment and see how accurate our physical representation of ourselves is. Because if we don't have an accurate physical representation of ourselves, well, we're going to have a rough go of things. Now, if you imagine, so you've got a line from your right eye to your left finger and a line from your left eye to your right finger. Where might those two lines intersect in space? They cross each other somewhere. And keeping eyes closed, could you see if you can pinch that intersection point with your right thumb and index finger? Just kind of grab where you think that would be in space. Again, eyes still closed. No cheating. And in theory, this is the point that is between your eyes and your fingers, each of them. Now, if you open your eyes and look at where your finger pinch is, does that seem like that's in line with your eyes and your fingertips? Or is it somewhere else altogether? Some folks it's a little closer, other folks it's a little off, right? Now you might be curious to try that with your other eye as well. And what we often find is that even on some like very simple thing, some of the very clearest, most dominant areas of ourselves, I mean, our hands and our face, our teleceptors in the head, these get the most real estate within our cortical self-image. Like these are the big things. If we don't know our hands and we don't know our head and face and lips and eyes, we're out of luck. But so these most dominant things, some of us, we might grab like way over here and say, oh, that's surely intersecting. It's like, well, no, it's not. That's off, which isn't, a bad thing. But it shows a pretty clear representation of just how significantly smudged our images might be. Now you might think, okay, so I didn't pinch the point. Who cares? It's like, well, do you use your eyes and hands each day? I do. Those are good things to know, right? So, just a little party trick to show our self-image might be a little bit off. But I'd like to kind of guide you through a practice here that I was introduced to by a guy named Jeff Holler. Brilliant dude. Get to hang out with him for another 2 weeks here tomorrow. Really excited about that. But we're going to talk about our aim a bit. And what I'd like you to do before we get into this is think about why you are here watching this right now. Think about whatever you wrote down or reflected on last night, this morning, even at the very beginning of this. Like, what is the thing that you want to change? What is the experience of yourself and your life and the world around you that you want to shift? You might keep that in mind. It's the thing we're reaching for, the thing we're aiming for. And I should say, I love the embodied metaphors. I think they're so rich. They reveal so much. And so we're going to take that metaphor of trying to hit the target, trying to reach the mark, trying to whatever, and we'll turn that into an embodied experience. And so if you take a couple of moments, once you have that vision in your mind, if you just scan through yourself, head to toe, and take note of what you are most aware of within yourself. What of this here and now sensory experience are you most connected to? And of course, we can throw some cues around too, some prompts for extra thought. And you might think where you meet the support underneath you, whether that's a chair, whether it's the floor, what kind of contact you have with that. You might also think about any areas of tension that you notice within yourself as well. My favorite question with eyes closed is like, well, do you have a body? Simple question, right? A bit of a silly question, but truly, how do you know? What is the sensory experience that is letting you know that you exist as a physical organism? It's the sort of thing we take for granted. What's going on internally within you that clues you into the fact that you're more than meat, right? Now, we can begin to play with this a little bit more. So you'll need a bit of, a scrap of something, whether it's a bit of lint or fuzz or you could tear off a little piece of paper, whatever the case may be. I hope they don't mind that I'm tearing up their little card holder. Oops, room key. I paid for this place, fine. So you've got a little bit of something here, right? And if you've got a table in front of you, you can set it there. If your thigh is available, I don't know why your thigh would be unavailable, but if your thigh is available, you can set it on your thigh. It's your thigh. It's you. I hope you're available. So you use your vision, right, to place that object in space. Like, you know where it is. You can see it there, right? So would you please just, finger, thumb, pick that object up, bring it toward your face, and then set it back down. Don't have to think about it too much. Simple thing, right? How many times a day do we do this without thinking about it? Pick something up, maybe look at something, whatever the case may be. Phone, certainly I pick this up by bringing it here. And so what would the quality of that movement be? If you were going to place it on a scale of, 1 to 10, hard to put a numerical value with it, but you might just think to yourself like, oh, okay, was that easy? Was that difficult? Did I not even notice? That's fine too. Effortless, nice, cool, okay. Now, could you repeat that movement at half the speed? Very slowly reaching toward it. And as you do, noticing within yourself, like, what is working? What parts of you are involved in this movement, and how are they involved? What are the ways in which they're involved? How does this movement actually take place? How is it that you're actually getting this thing done? And after you've set it back down, you might think, well, okay, did I notice anything differently about that movement at half the speed? Was there new sensory information I got? Was there a new sense of the quality of that movement? Am I more aware of the different parts of myself involved there? And now we'll try much more aware of shoulder and elbow, eyes felt relaxed. So it's sweet. Okay, cool. So we're getting a little bit of awareness here. Now, could we reduce the speed even further? I was going to say reduce by half again, but that might mean double it. Make it a quarter of the speed of what it first was, right? Slow it down even further. For some of us, this might be like painfully slowly. Hopefully not literal pain, but and you might be curious, are you reaching straight toward it all the time? Are you bringing your hand toward you in one clean arc? As you set it back down again at a quarter of the speed, are there parts of this movement where you jerk through the range, where you almost chunk some of these ranges together? Less smooth. Yeah. This is about the speed where many of us see that rather than reaching through space in like a crisp, clean line, there are all of these little perturbations along the way, right? Little subtle shifts as we get there. More smooth awareness of breath. Cool, bicep more pronounced. Interesting. Okay. So we're getting a little bit different feedback here too. Now, is it possible to slow that down even further? I know, right? Yeah, weird. We could move very, very slowly if we want to. We certainly have that option. So could we make this now 1/8 of the speed of what it was at the start? And you might think like 1/8 of the speed, that's slow. That's slower than maybe some of us have the patience for, but can we just try it? In particular, what are you doing with your fingers as your hand moves through space? What's the relationship of your fingers to that little speck of whatever it is you're grabbing, and your thigh too. And as you pull the object back up toward you, how much effort is involved in this? Are there areas where you sense that, man, why am I working so hard? And you set it back down again. Are you moving in a straight line? Or do you find little jumps? Are you breathing as you do this too? It can be very tempting to hold our breath anytime we slow down. Really, anytime we create awareness of anything, it can be tempting to constrict ourselves. More aware of energy and fingers, cool. Softer grip, even more breath awareness, nice. And now one time, regular speed. Could you pick it up, grab it, bring it to you, and set it back down? Maybe do that a couple of times and just ask yourself, has anything changed about my experience of this movement? And maybe there's something significant, maybe there's something very subtle, maybe there's nothing at all. That's always a possibility too. More the body comes into awareness with each slower iteration. Very cool. More of a mindless action. Notice my forearm rotating more. Anticipation in the next position in space versus letting that go and noticing it right where it was then. Ah, interesting. Yeah. That anticipation bit is funny. So one of the things we might keep in mind with whatever aim it is we're setting for ourselves, whatever vision it is we're bringing to life, is that even rooted into your physiology, there is no straight path. If you didn't have those little micro shifts, you as an organism wouldn't know where you are in space. You wouldn't know where you are relative to yourself. It's those tiny little movements of thumb and finger that help your brain coordinate thumb and finger closer and closer together, right? All of us to say, like, it's not going to be just like a clear shot, right? We need to be open to different options, different routes, different ways that we might organize ourselves. And yet, if we think back to the constructal law that we talked about before, you do in fact organize yourself for efficient movement, for efficient action within the world. And I like the assumption that anything you're going to do in life, whether it's physically oriented, like a movement practice, whether it's a professional shift, whatever it is, you're going to do through your body. And if you had a clearer sense of how you used yourself, if you had more trust in how you engaged with the world, you could have a much easier go of things. Sure, there would be some deviations along the way, but you would be much more likely to get where you're going if you had that experience of yourself. Because if you, just shift through a bit of awareness of yourself now, right? Are there changes in how you're sitting? Are there changes in how you're breathing? Are there changes in the way that you are thinking and feeling at this point? And likely, even if it's just a different experience of your shoulder or your wrist, something about your image of yourself has shifted in some way. Shoulder feels a little better. Cool, yeah. Nice that we can do that for ourselves just in 5 minutes, right? More present. And wouldn't it be nice if we could give ourselves experiences like that every day? Like, truly, we have that available, and yet we save it for later. We block off an hour of time. I'm going to do that for that. I'm going to do this. I'm going to check that box. I'm going to go to the whatever. It's like, no, you could really give yourself a tremendous gift of connecting to more of yourself, more ease within yourself. You could do that anytime you want. And the more iterations of that you give yourself, that's like grooving in other paths down that ski slope, right? Experiences of yourself as feeling ease, feeling capable, feeling peaceful. Yeah, what do we have? Giving myself credit, feeling content, present. Why not give yourself experiences like that? It might be interesting if you play a little compare and contrast. Who is the version of yourself that emerges from consistent experiences like that? Like if that were a daily thing for you, if that were a multiple times a day thing for you, how would that change the way that your life opens up around you? How would that change the way you feel in your body if you had that experience again and again and again and again and again and again? Personally, it's like, whoa, I like that version of me. He's good. He's effective. He's sharp. He's there, right? So we might talk about some of those restrictions as well. And we could give ourselves another little experience of this. But I should say, does anybody need a break for, like water in, water out, that kind of thing? Should we give ourselves a couple of minutes maybe just to attend to whatever organismic needs need attending? Now that we're back, I'd like to play a little bit with the idea of constraints from kind of a physical approach. And again, an embodied experience of exploring some of our constraints that we find in ourselves. And what we'll see is that the familiar way of overcoming those constraints often isn't the most effective way. It is neither as, well, it's not as impactful, and it's certainly just not as easy as it could be. So I want to give us a sense of just, again, how easy and how capable we could be as organisms here within a body. So what we can do is a little check-in for ourselves, is whether you're seated or whether you're standing, whether you're on the floor, whatever the case may be. You could just look left or right a couple of times and take note of what you see as you do each time. Like if you look to the right, for example, how far can you see before it gets to be like, I'm kind of straining myself a bit, whether it's straining your eyes, straining your neck or your chest. Like give yourself a reference point. Like maybe I see, well, you can hear it in my voice, right? When I look too far, maybe I can see, it's like, that's a sign that I've gone too far. Okay, so maybe comfortably I can see that picture on the wall over there. It's an old school image of an airplane. Who knew? And maybe if I look that way, comfortably I could see the little espresso machine. Comfortably. Again, there's not a whole lot to prove here. We're looking for what is and how it is right here and right now. So there's not like I'm the bendiest award, anything like that, certainly. And we're working with the assumption that you are yourself and you might want to be good to yourself as we go through this, right? So we'll keep that in mind. So everybody have kind of a reference point in the room for each direction? Yeah? Cool. So we're going to work, play, explore with the right side, just for the sake of me being able to cue. Whether or not that side was easier for you, it's going to be okay. I think we'll see that things shift in some cool ways. No matter what we do with ourselves. I shouldn't say no matter what we do. There are some conditions that make things a little easier, but the direction, not the most important of those. So, we could get into a whole discussion about how we know right and left anyway, but we'll save that for another day. So you've got, let's assume, a midline somewhere between right and left, right? And as we talked about before when we looked at the fingers and the eyes here, it's like maybe we don't actually know our sense of midline here so well. So what you might do is, and you could have eyes open, you could have eyes closed, but could you actually kind of trace along yourself what your midline might be? Give yourself a couple of physical references here. I see a very young child on one of these screens. I don't know how that child logged in here. Whose child is that? Oh, there's a person attached to the child. Good. Okay. And of course, you might wonder, like, well, where does that midline end? Like, is it my forehead and is it my pubic bone? Or do I go to the top of my head, along the back of my head? Have I considered that, my center actually extends through my body, down under whatever kind of genitals you've got, up along the top and back of the head, maybe down the neck too. And of course, there are certain limits where, we can't reach all of ourselves, likely, certainly not within a comfortable, easy way. But so we have this midline. And I'm curious, if you look to the right here, even just after that experience of finding your midline, if you look to the right, do you find that you can see a little bit farther with a little bit more ease? And maybe yes, maybe no. For some of us, just knowing the axis that we are actually moving around goes a long way. Like when you know your center, we can come up with all sorts of metaphors here, right? But when you know center, it is much easier to use yourself within the world. Not use yourself mechanically, right? But to function within the world. So we have this center line. And we'll use this as a reference point as well. Now, if you think of your shoulders, sternum facing this center line, and just your head moving to the right, what's the comfortable distance that your head can move? It's like your nose is going to be pointing at something in the room. Even if it's just a funny mark on the wall, or maybe there's a more obvious landmark. I've got a lamp over there, one of those bougie bronze old school steampunky lamps. Of course I'm in that kind of hotel. Yeah. So again, we're working with what feels like the easiest range we can work with, not like, I can see all the way over there. Not a good way to be. Notice eyes keep dropping lower. Okay, interesting. Cool, Claudia. So what is the easy point that your nose can fix on in the room? Like I notice if I look with my nose pointing to the lamp, even that's like a little uncomfortable for me. But I could look at, the corner of the table over there. That feels pretty comfortable. And of course, it might seem like an obvious question, but did your eyes move along with your head? Probably they did, right? We tend to do that. So what we can do here, if you keep your nose anchored on that point over there, so sternum, shoulders facing forward toward your original midline, nose is anchored on a point, could you let your eyes slowly move to the left and slowly move to the right? Again, within what feels like a comfortable range of motion. And again, you might check in with how's the quality of that movement? Is this a chunking kind of movement? Is this a smooth path throughout? Are there areas where you feel like you skip over looking in the room? Do your eyes stay on one plane? Do they track upwards or downwards? And maybe two, does it feel like it makes more sense for your eyes to look one direction or the other? You want to go ahead and let that go. Let yourself face forward once again. Eyes seem to be started really unsmooth and even unpleasant. Interesting. Eyes go further. Yeah, we'll find that our eyes hold quite a bit. Like for such visionary creatures and people, it's like we can hardly see. So even after that little bit of movement, let's give ourselves just a little experience. We'll check in, compare, contrast. But if you look to the right once again, has anything shifted in terms of where you can see? How smoothly you can see? How much ease is involved in that movement? And again, maybe yes, maybe no. I'm willing to bet that we can probably see a little bit farther along that arc, right? Well, let's give ourselves another experience here. Wider range of eyesight. Cool. Yeah, yeah. So again, what we're doing here is giving ourselves little nuanced experiences outside of the norm. Things that make our whole system go, okay, yeah. Because again, we will operate toward ease when we have an experience of ease. We will do that without us having to think about it. It's like you don't have to consciously think, better move my eyes, better move my head, better move my... The system is intelligent enough to organize itself around that. More with the body involved, cool, cool. So, what you could do now is bring your left hand on top of your head with your fingers kind of tickling your temple or the top of your ear. Do we all know left? One of them makes an L when you hold it up, although both could if you do that. Yeah. So could you just let your head drop a little bit toward your left shoulder? Passively. It's as if your hand is pulling your head a little toward your left shoulder, not to the point where you get like a strain and tension along your neck, anything like that, but just a little bit over. And as you do that a few times, are you aware of any shift in where you meet that support underneath you? Are you aware of a shift in your weight? Do you find that you get a little heavier on the right side of yourself or on the left side of yourself? And if you can keep this same easy pace going with the head, what I'd offer as another option to add to the mix is as your head lowers over toward your left shoulder, could you shift over onto your right sit bone or right foot a little bit more? Just pour a bit more of your weight over to that right side. You might ask, well, okay, does that make this movement feel a little smoother? A little easier? Do I feel like I can take my head a little farther through space? And maybe that feels like a good option for us. We might also check in with, as you take your head over to the left, what happens when you shift your weight over to the left? Of course, we're going to shift a lot farther through space here, but you might also find that that feels like an easier way to go about doing it, right? So you might try a couple of times one side, a couple of times the other, just to compare and contrast. And as you do, all I'd ask is that you keep that same rhythm going with your head moving over toward that left shoulder. And of course, our arms might be getting tired, so we could give ourselves a little break here too. And the arm could come down. And maybe take a pause, can't fall over. Yeah, that one could be a little tricky. And now, even within just this seated position, you may be able to sense that, well, there's a little bit of a shift in terms of how we sit. And if you look over to the right one more time, again, we could ask, well, has anything changed there? Maybe it has, maybe it hasn't again. All of these are little experiments. We never quite know how our system is going to respond with them. We can guess, but it's hard to know for certain. If you know for certain ahead of time, it's like, you're not learning anything, right? Even if we learn like, well, that didn't do anything, fine, great. That's really useful information. So we'll try another little game here too. Let's interlace the fingers and let them rest on top of the head with the elbows out to the side. And then if you face your sternum over to the right, so you twist yourself to the right a little bit, could you hold within that direction? And start to side bend a little bit, bringing your right elbow closer toward the floor, and then your left elbow closer toward the floor. Again, these don't have to be large movements. A safe assumption is maybe smaller than you think. Because what we often find is we get the most rich sensory information from the smallest, subtlest little experiences. Our nervous system is actually able to discriminate between changes more effectively when we have small movements here. And you can let that go and face forward once again. Just for kicks, we might check in with that rotation once more. I know in terms of where I can see easily, it's like, oof, man. That espresso machine, that was my landmark on the right. That's bizarre. Or on the left. From blade, chest, and joint. Blade, chest, joint. Okay. Yeah, I don't know which of those, but shoulder blade, chest, and some joint. Shoulder joint. Okay. So let's give ourselves another little experiment here. Why not? Each of these little iterations can teach our system something. Maybe not even teach our system, but our system can learn from each of those somethings. We'll find, a pretty comfortable rule of thumb in life is that significant things aren't the things that we get taught necessarily. So, could you rotate your chest to the right so that your sternum faces right and left? And for most of us, we'll find that the head and the eyes come along for the ride, right? We tend toward, habitually, we keep these things as a unit. It's almost like we've got a couple of our Rubik's Cube layers just like glued together. And we shift all of those. And this can be slow, right? Because whenever we move the head, the eyes, all of this, we can get kind of dizzy. So let this be as slow and even as small as need be. Even if it's, I'm looking at you and I barely see you moving, that's fine. So if you need to, you can scale this back and back and back. Remember when we picked that thing up? Very slow, right? So if you can keep that rhythm going with your chest and shoulders, could you start to move your head in the opposite direction? For some of us, it's like, what? So as chest moves to face the right, head could move to face the left. And as chest comes back to center, head could move to the right. And I promise I ran out of gold stars, so there's not really a medal for like doing this the best, doing this right, whatever right is in this case. So you're free to experiment with it a little bit. And if you've got that down well enough, we might add another little bit to the mix. And what you could do in this case is allow your eyes to move with your shoulders and chest while your head moves opposite. It's like, holy shit, what? We can give it a try. We can play with it a little bit. So shoulders and eyes move one way as head moves another. And then they can alter. And again, not really a right or a wrong. I promise I'm not looking and making fun of anybody. I don't think anybody is. But isn't it interesting that at a certain level of complexity, it's like we throw a wrench in the gears a bit, and we've got to really slow things down and be present with ourselves in order to know what we're doing with ourselves. Even as I'm talking, I find that when I talk and try to do it too, it's like, yeah, that's a bit too much going on. But now I think I've got it. Okay. Hooray. I'm a good student, a good boy. Pat on the back. And isn't it funny how many of us go through this and think like, am I going to get it right? But whether you get it right, whether it, it was smooth or chunky, whatever the case may be, let's just say, well, that was interesting. And then we can settle back into neutral. Yeah, tricky, hard, fun, yeah. And if you look over to that right side again, we might ask too, has anything changed here? Reminds me of learning how to juggle. Yeah. Easier as I stayed with it. Feel like an owl. Yeah, right? Very cool. And so, of course, we were working with the right side and using that as our check-in, but we did look to the left at the beginning. So I'm curious if you look to the left now. I'm willing to bet that it's not just your right-sided function that changed, right? Like, you changed. Your system changed. And likely you can see a bit farther to the left, as well as to the right. So I'm curious, how was that for you guys? If you just type in, a little bit about what your experience is like, or just how you feel within yourself now. What's going on in your world? More vitality. That's a good feeling. Yeah. Energizing. Cool. Okay. Enjoyed it. Loosened up. Yeah. Bubbling. Ooh, bubbling. I like it. Right side feels so much more aware. Calm, cool, warm, relaxed, juicy, and fun. Uplifted. Yeah, I love that. Oh, cool. Great. What a good way to get into a Sunday. Yeah. A bit emotional. Release of tension. Yeah. I'm glad you said that, Martha. This can be, it's never just a physical thing, right? Like we are so fundamentally interwoven with ourselves. That sometimes when we dissolve some of the habitual tensions and armors, when we give ourselves these new experiences of ourselves, we open the door to a lot of things that we have armored, right? It's like that armor is there covering something in some way. Your habitual patterns of tension within yourself are there for a reason, protecting against physical hurts of the world or emotional hurts of the world. It's like, well, when you dissolve this, maybe your shoulder has only ever known this is the way that it can be. When you let that go, something changes, right? Your experience of yourself changes. Your ability to engage within the world changes. Your perception of yourself and the world changes. I have to look if I'm doing this. Me. Yeah, my body is doing this well. And yeah, and maybe it's a matter too of who are you if not your body? Or who is your body if not you? Like we think of these things as nice conceptual ideas, but it's a false separation. There's you can't split them. You can't point to where you are necessarily. And so I wonder if you think back to that vision you had of why you are here in the first place, why you signed up for this, what you want to change. When you think about your ability to make that happen, has anything changed for you? Does this version of you, this experience of you, do you have a different sense of what it would be like or how you might get there? Has anybody felt anything like that? And maybe yes, maybe no. Insight in my motivation. Cool. Willingness to work with what I've got. That's a good one. Yeah, I need to appreciate the process instead of focusing just on the goal. Yeah. Right? Like if we had started that and said, twist farther, look farther. Ugh, We could try that. You want to try like the willpower way of doing it? Look as far as you can to the right, quick. It's like, all of us, like I can feel part of myself just like, no. For the recognition of my tendency to question self and seek outside validation. Yeah. Huh. So you guys bring up a couple of interesting points that there's a process of moving toward whatever it is we're moving toward. That the only way we're going to move toward it, to make something of it, is to use what we have and what we are. It's like you can wish for this or wish for that, but like unless it's here and this and accessible to you, like unless you're able to resource it well, you can't leverage that, right? From direction, I get to in other situations. Cool, yeah. Small steps in process rather than focused on the big change. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the cool thing about, as we mentioned, systems is that, yes, they're made up of little shifts, but those little shifts at a certain point, like jump. You get a bit colder and a bit colder and a bit colder, and then ice. It freezes, right? You may not notice a small shift at like 35 degrees, 34 degrees, 33 degrees, but then things start to freeze. It's a bit of a nonlinear process. And the other thing that I'm glad you mentioned, I think it was Aubrey mentioned, the things that we don't identify within ourselves, we project out in some fundamental ways. Like if we don't think that we are intelligent, and I promise each of you is much more intelligent than you think you are, everyone in the world is smarter than us. Every guru has the answer. Every expert has the secret. Everybody has like the thing that we don't have because we don't see it within ourselves. Or, if we don't identify with our aggression, this came up in a call I had last week with a few folks. The world is an aggressive place. Everyone seems to be infringing on us. It's always them, they're aggressive, they're this, they're that. Until we can start to reassociate with our own aggression, our own sense of support and security, our own intelligence. We're always going to cast it out. It's like the world is a screen for whatever things within ourselves that we're unable to resource at this point. Not things that we don't have, not things that aren't a part of us, things that we aren't able to access. Maybe they're constrained in some way. They're tucked away under a layer of tension and armoring, whatever the case may be. If we can dissolve some of those and not just let go, man. Like someone's like, hey, let that shit go. Easier said than done, right? It's difficult to just like let go of tension. Like if someone's shoulders are up to here and I say, hey, loosen up. It's like, what? That doesn't work. We have to provide a container. We have to give ourselves the conditions in which that tension is no longer necessary, in which that conflict, that pull that we have within ourselves is no longer necessary. Then we've got a cleaner slate. We're able to access more of ourselves. But rather than say like, hey, let go of your shoulders, it's like as soon as I do that or start to like push down, it's like, whoop, they're going to come back even further. Kind of a Jungian perspective. What does that say? Projecting is the response to being unfamiliar with their shadow personas. Yeah. The old school psychotherapists spoke a lot about that. Exactly. Yeah. Jung, Reich, pearls in the Gestalt world. If we aren't able to see that as a part of ourselves, it's like we put that out there. That's why there's so many bad guys in the world with all sorts of people who forget that they can do bad things too, right? The world is full of bad guys if you're a person who doesn't think that you are capable of bad things. The world is full of saviors if you are the sort of person who cannot save yourself too. So fundamentally what all of this is about is coming into closer contact with more of yourself. And really my goal with this is just to give you a couple of experiences to show that it could be easy. Like it could feel full of ease. It could be simple. It could be rapid, right? Like we could do all sorts of different stretches and all of this to try and increase our rotation, or we could play with it. We could give ourselves some experiments of it. It's like, take your pick. I would rather play and experiment than like, strengthen my rotators this way and do this. Whether it's physical stuff, whether it's life stuff, relationship stuff, it's like, I would much rather explore and experiment and play through that than like strain and strive and all of that. But that's the cultural context we find ourselves in, this straining and striving and on and on and on. So I wonder, we've covered a lot of ground. I'm curious what kind of questions you guys have at this point, or what are you thinking about? What seems like a next step for you after this? What do you feel like you need in order to be a more capable version of yourself moving forward? What's going on in those big, beautiful brains? Breaking my larger goals down into smaller pieces. Yeah, momentum's a nice thing. Identify all the constraints I've created for myself. Yeah, cool. And I like that there's the myself and I created them. It's going to be a lot easier to identify and resolve those when you know that you've made them. Discipline to remind myself to move slow. Notice the small things. Yeah, cool. Greater connection from theory into practice in baby steps. Sweet. Identifying and playing with blind spots. Yeah, great, cool. Small things, seeing a need for approval and wanting permission to act. That's the other thing. The world is full of gatekeepers, people you need permission from, if you don't give yourself permission. Deep shit. Yeah, a little bit. I mean, it is a level of depth that is unfamiliar in the habitual way of playing with things, right? But it feels kind of nice, like when you get down to a level of depth like that. It's like, oh, this is easy, this is juicy. What I mean, right? Whether it's a physical thing, like, oh, I can look farther, or an embodied metaphor of I have a clear vision, I can feel my feet underneath me. Yeah, giving myself permission for my wants and creating a habitat around that. Beautiful. Yeah, letting go of the difficulty and effort equaling good or right. There's a thought. Yeah. The difference between what is right and what feels right. Right? Like those are strange things. Is there a difference between those two? Very often we get caught up on what is right. Like, what's the right way to post on social media? What's the right way to run my business? What's the right way to move? What's the right way to It's like, you make the world your judge in that case. That's a hell of a way to be. So creating appreciation versus wanting recognition. Cool, cool, cool. I love this. Beautiful. Well, if this is something you guys are curious to explore more, the fun thing about this is like, you can always go a little bit deeper with it.